Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Rebecca Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan El Rom.
In our top story, 2 Israeli hostages have been rescued and a family has finally been reunited. In a daring rescue under the cover of darkness, Israel Defense Forces, Shin Bet Intelligence Service, and counterterrorism units entered a heavily fortified and dangerous area of Rafah that had not been cleared of Hamas terror elements. The Israeli Air Force completed massive airstrikes in the area, while the elite units penetrated the second floor of a private family home in the heart of the Hamas stronghold in southern Gaza, where the hostages were being held. Israeli forces engaged with and killed at least 3 Hamas terrorists, while other soldiers shielded hostages Fernando Marman and Noberto Har with their own bodies. This is the first successful hostage rescue since October, when Ori Megiddish was freed by IDF troops. News of the rescue brought much-needed hope to the people of Israel, who continue to pray for the safe return of the remaining 134 hostages held by the Iranian-backed terror group in Gaza.
U.S. President Joe Biden has come out against the Jewish state and warned that if Israel does not get in line, he will withhold badly needed U.S. defense aid. Biden described the IDF's operations to root out the Iranian-backed Hamas terror group as being over the top, and has blamed Israel for not doing enough to limit civilian casualties. He also demanded a 6-week pause in the fighting. Israel is opposed to the Biden plan because it will allow Hamas time to reorganize, rearm, and hide the remaining hostages and top Hamas leaders deeper underground. According to numerous reports, Biden is so frustrated with Israel that he used an expletive when referring to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The White House issued a memorandum making U.S. aid dependent on adherence to international humanitarian law. AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, decried the initiative as an unnecessary directive that imposes new requirements on Israel. It said Israel is a moral army fighting in an unprecedented complex urban battlefield in compliance with international law. It's confronting a terror group that deliberately and despicably uses innocent Palestinians as human shields, hides among and below civilians, and continues to hold 136 hostages, including 8 Americans.
In an egregious violation of Israeli sovereignty, the United States and the United Kingdom have sanctioned so-called Israeli settlers for violence while ignoring rampant Palestinian terrorism throughout Judea and Samaria. Earlier this month, the Biden administration announced travel bans and financial restrictions against 4 Israeli citizens, accusing them of violently attacking Arabs. According to the Jewish News Syndicate, there were more than 2,600 Arab attacks against Jews in the biblical heartland in the period between October 7th and January 15th, but the sanctions only name Israelis. Experts believe that targeting Israelis living in the biblical heartland is just the first step in sanctioning all Jews living in Judea and Samaria, which many world leaders believe should become a Palestinian state.
The Egyptian military is bolstering its forces along the Israeli border as a warning to the Jewish state against its campaign in the Hamas stronghold of Rafah. The city, which is located near the Egyptian border, has become a terror and smuggling haven, and the IDF considers the campaign on the Hamas-controlled city crucial to the eradication of the Iranian-backed terror group from Gaza. Millions of people have fled to the southernmost Gazan city, and Egypt fears a massive influx of Palestinians, which it refuses to accept, even temporarily. Egypt has moved troops and heavy artillery near the border, and Cairo warned Jerusalem that it will nullify the peace treaty with Israel if the IDF moves into Rafah.
The IDF has discovered Hamas's top-secret data center underneath the United Nations Relief and Works Agency's headquarters. The subterranean server farm holds industrial power banks, a massive electrical room, and housing for terrorists. This is just the latest evidence proving the Iranian-backed terror group's total infiltration of the refugee agency. Philippe Lazzarini, the head of UNRWA, feigned ignorance that the sophisticated terror center had been constructed underneath UNRWA's Gaza headquarters. He claimed that the facility and its tunnels must have been built after UNRWA staff had evacuated Gaza City. Israel's coordinator for government activities in the territories quickly responded that Lazzarini knew. and chose to ignore the facts so that he could later try to deny them. Israel's ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan, said that Lazzarini refused Israeli requests to search UNRWA facilities in Gaza, despite being presented with evidence that the terror group had been using UNRWA schools and buildings. Foreign Minister Israel Katz demanded that the UNRWA chief resign, saying that the discovery shows UNRWA's deep involvement with Hamas. And Housing Minister Yitzhak Goldenkopf ordered the Israel Lands Authority to immediately halt all agreements with UNRWA and to evict the corrupt organization from state land.
The heads of the Knesset's Christian Allies Caucus briefed their Dutch counterparts on evidence of UNRWA's involvement in terror and urged the Netherlands to cut funding to the corrupt organization permanently. The meeting, held at the Dutch House of Representatives in The Hague, was led by KCAC chairwoman Shirin Haskell, who called for the complete dismantlement of the Palestinian Refugee Agency. More than a dozen countries have frozen UNRWA funds after the IDF released a report proving that 10% of UNRWA employees are active members of Hamas and that 12 members of UNRWA staff took part in the October 7th massacre of 1,200 people, as well as the kidnapping of 253 hostages. One UNRWA employee even held hostages in his home. Dutch lawmaker Don Sieder said, "We have been worried about the role that UNRWA plays in the conflict for a long time, and have often warned about the hatred that is taught in UNRWA school books. Now it turns out that UNRWA employees have been involved in a horrible act of terrorism. We can no longer avoid the discussion about the legitimacy of UNRWA itself."
Al Jazeera is still employing Hamas terrorists and providing them with a platform to spread anti-Israel propaganda to the Arab world. New information has surfaced proving that a well-known Al Jazeera reporter is actually a commander in the Iranian-backed terror group. IDF troops have presented evidence recovered from a laptop found in a Hamas base in northern Gaza belonging to a prominent correspondent for the Arabic-language news outlet. Israeli intelligence analysts found documents and photographs proving that the individual was not only an active member of Hamas, but a prominent commander in the terror group's anti-tank missile unit. This comes just 1 month after 2 Hamas terrorists, who were also Al Jazeera reporters, were killed in an IDF airstrike as they were actively participating in activities that threatened the safety of IDF troops.
Evangelical Christians in the United States became the target of a pro-Palestinian terrorist last week who opened fire at a megachurch in Houston, Texas, with an AR-15 assault rifle. The weapon had the word Palestine on it. Police recovered anti-Semitic materials in possession of the shooter. The terrorist was neutralized by off-duty officers who were praised for their heroism and vigilance. Radical Islamists often chant the mantra, first the Saturday people, meaning the Jews, then the Sunday people, the Christians. This troubling development is a fulfillment of their murderous ideology.
Social media giant Meta has finally taken action against Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei for his outrageous anti-Semitic posts that call for the destruction of Israel and America. Meta announced that Khamenei's Facebook and Instagram accounts had been suspended for violating the company's dangerous organizations and individuals policy. Khamenei has used social media in Persian and in English to vilify Israel and has repeatedly praised the October 7th Hamas attacks on the Jewish state.
The state of Israel continues to grow and thrive as the national homeland of the Jewish people. A newly released demographic report reflects that the Jewish state grew by 1.9% in 2023 and is on track to reach 10 million residents by the end of 2024. The Jewish Virtual Library posted the census to its online encyclopedia, which reflects that Israel is currently home to 9,842,000 citizens. Nearly half of world Jewry is now living in Israel, and this number is expected to grow in the coming years. And in another exciting development, more Israeli Jews are moving to the biblical heartland. According to an annual report released by the Israeli Ministry of Interior, more than 15,000 Jews made their homes in Judea and Samaria last year. More than 517,000 Jews now reside in the biblical heartland. Baruch Gordon, the director of the report, told the Jewish News Syndicate that despite massive attempts to delegitimize residents of Judea and Samaria, and despite international pressures to halt growth, The Jewish population continues to blossom at a rate much higher than that of the rest of the country. That concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. We're here in our beautiful studio in Jerusalem. My guest today is Lahav Harkov. She's a senior correspondent from the Jewish Insider. Lahav, thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Lahav, tell our viewers a little about what is the Jewish Insider?
Jewish Insider is a U.S.-based website and daily newsletter called the Daily Kickoff, which gives all the news that you need to know about the Jewish community and also political issues pertaining to the Jewish community, especially initiatives going on in Congress that have to do with anti-Semitism, aid to Israel, and things of interest to the Jewish community.
Well, you've been covering a lot of stories about the war, obviously, and just recently we had the heroic rescue of 2 hostages. Can you tell us about that?
IDF soldiers entered a home in Rafah in the southern tip of Gaza, where 2 Israeli hostages were held. Older men. One was, I believe, 61 and one is 70 years old. There was a real firefight in there. It was theoretically a civilian home, but there were many terrorists there, and 2 soldiers died overnight as well. But the hostages were brought home in relatively good health. I mean, as good health you can be, being held hostage for 130 days and not having all of your medications and things that you would need, but relatively good health, and they're reunited with their families. It's really good news, and it's incredible that we've had such a sort of daring rescue operation. I hope we see more.
Yeah, we heard President Biden this week say, don't go into Rafah. And then the very next day, we actually went in this daring mission. Are you seeing a divergence in the American and the Israeli perspective on what's going to happen going forward in the war?
Prime Minister Netanyahu has said again and again that Israel needs to go into Rafah in order to finish the job of eliminating Hamas. And so there is very much a divergence in not just in the messaging, but in what the leadership of the U.S. and Israel want.
At the beginning of the war, we heard a lot of very strong statements in support of Israel from the Biden administration, and everyone was saying, well, yeah, that's what he's saying publicly, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of pressure. Now we're seeing publicly, Biden saying things like, we're going too far, and we should stop the assault in Rafah, and we need to do a ceasefire. What do you think is going to happen going forward? Do we see this divergence getting bigger and bigger as the war goes on?
The Biden administration supports the goal of wanting to eliminate Hamas, and of course wanting to bring the hostages home, and that's Israel's stated goal, right? But I think that the Biden administration says, okay, Israel mostly eliminated Hamas. They're going to be much less of a danger now. We can wrap things up, and there'll be less danger in people's lives. Whereas Israelis say, well, we've had a mini war every couple of years for the past 15 years, and we don't want that to happen anymore. We want to be done fighting Hamas. We want a decisive victory. And so when we say eliminate Hamas, we really mean it. We want to be done with them. That's really where I think the dispute lies. There's, of course, the issues of humanitarian aid, which is to say, I don't think anybody in Israel thinks that the people of Gaza need to starve, God forbid. I think that, across the political spectrum and the population of Israel, people want the people of Gaza to have enough, food to be able to live, etc. The question is more, does Israel need to provide it? And also that Israel should be able to inspect it, which sometimes slows things down. And so the initial pressure, when Biden was very vocally supportive of Israel, was more about, Israel needs to sort of speed up the inspections and let the aid in. And there's continuing friction about that mechanism as well.
We're hearing a lot of reports that the Biden administration is even going as far as considering recognizing a Palestinian state. This is a huge problem here in the Middle East. Most Israelis are against the Palestinian state. Everyone sees it as a terror force. This is something that was always talked about as a negotiation between the Palestinians and Israelis. Why would they consider doing something so unilateral and so, I would say, anti-Israel in recognizing the Palestinian state right now in the middle of a war?
I would add to that also, I think that Israelis see that, and including Israelis who normally do favor a Palestinian state, see it as giving a reward to the Palestinians for attacking Israel. And so you have people who normally are for a two-state solution and want a Palestinian state who are saying now is not the time to do that. That being said, both the State Department and the White House have publicly denied that they want that. I think that what's going on is that there are different forces operating within the Biden administration who have different views about Israel. And those people will also leak to the press and talk to their favored reporters about what they think should happen. I think that Biden has stuck very closely to what's sort of called the Clinton parameters, or sort of what the idea of a two-state solution was in the 90s. And that as long as Biden has the final say here, which I know people have questions about that as well, but Biden is somebody who I think does think it needs to be a negotiated two-state solution.
We hear about the end of the war after this last assault against 4 Hamas battalions in Rafah, but a lot of talk about another front opening up in the north. How soon can something like that happen? Is that something that you believe is going to actually take place? Are we going to fight Hezbollah now?
The U.S. has had really intensive efforts, diplomatic efforts in Lebanon. And while there's no report of a breakthrough, it's enough that Hezbollah hasn't really escalated anything in a long time. They've sort of continued at this lower level attacks on Israel. And so I think because this is continuing for so long, there is a chance that there won't be a fight. That being said, it's intense enough that you have about 100,000 people who can't live in their homes in northern Israel. And so we can't maintain this current situation. If the U.S. wants there to be a diplomatic solution, and I think Israel's leadership wants a diplomatic solution for Lebanon too, they don't want to fight a second war. But the solution needs to include an end to the rocket attacks on northern Israel, because you can't have these people living in hotels indefinitely.
Lahav, there are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
First of all, if you're interested in Israel, you want to know what's happening inside Israel, among Israeli people, you should definitely read Jewish Insider every day. But in general, I would love to just thank this audience for their support for Israel. It really makes a huge difference. And so continue supporting it, both, writing to your members of Congress and showing up. It's so meaningful to us here in Israel.
Thank you, Lahav, for being on the show. And thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
And now, the truth from Zion.
In recent years, we have witnessed growing ties between Christians and Jews. The two have become friends and allies, especially on issues pertaining to the State of Israel. Following the October 7th Hamas massacre of 1,200 innocent Israelis, the international Christian community rose up to support Israel and the Jewish people in a way that has not been experienced before.
On Tuesday, tens of thousands gathered on the National Mall to show support for Israel and condemn anti-Semitism.
Many nations, organizations, and even university professors celebrated the murder of Israelis after the Hamas attack.
Professor Russell Rickford, he decided to get out there at a rally 2 days ago and say the following about watching that attack.
Hamas has shifted the balance of power. Yeah. Yes. Hamas has punctured the illusion of invincibility. Yeah. That's what they've done. Yeah. Hamas has challenged the monopoly of violence. Yeah. It was exhilarating. It was exhilarating. It was energizing.
Christians around the world have done just the opposite. The International Christian Embassy Jerusalem is based in Israel's capital, but their influence spans the globe.
We brought a team from the Christian Embassy here today to Kibbutz Shafayim. They've taken in the survivors, 135 families from Kfar Aza, which is one of the worst hit of all the communities there. And we've come to talk to some of them and meet them and help them out.
The embassy not only raised $14 million for Israel, but also donated bomb shelters and secure communication systems for first responders. They helped hundreds of thousands of displaced Israelis and purchased ambulances. They even sent volunteers to work on Israeli farms, which needed to be maintained after foreign workers returned to their countries of origin following the outbreak of the war. The International Fellowship of Christians and Jews put their fear aside and traveled to war-shattered southern Israel soon after the Hamas massacre. They distributed flak jackets and first responder medical kits. In the following weeks, they organized 30 mobile bomb shelters to be secured along Israel's northern border to protect Israelis from rockets fired by the Iranian-backed Hezbollah terror group in Lebanon. Israeli civilians can also rely on the Christian organization Bridges for Peace that has been feeding thousands of underprivileged Israelis every month for years. Since October 7th, the needs of people have dramatically intensified. The organization recently offered household appliances to 50 families whose homes were destroyed.
Christians around the world are acting, mobilizing, and praying for Israel like never before. I'm seeing solidarity missions, prayer rallies, and financial support increase from the worldwide Bible-believing community since the atrocities of October 7th.
So why would Christians want to support Israel in the first place? Most Christians understand that the Jewish people have a covenant with God, and the Holy Land was promised to them thousands of years ago. Many want to help Jews immigrate to Israel and assist them as they build a new life in their ancestral homeland. Organizations like the Israel Allies Foundation not only mobilize support for Israel, but are also educating Christians so they can dispel anti-Israel lies, fight boycotts of Israel, and defend against the political threats that aim to delegitimize Israel in the public arena. Israel is the only nation in the Middle East where the Christian population is growing every year instead of declining. It is also the only country in the region where Christians are free to practice their religion with protections that are entrenched in law. Meanwhile, Christians in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and Iran are today under threat and are persecuted by Islamist extremists. The influence of Bible-believing Christians is felt not only in Israel, but also on the international stage. Political leaders take note of the substantial backing from evangelicals worldwide, and it has a positive impact on global affairs. Solidarity missions are underway with Christians traveling to Israel to show their support. Prayer rallies, both in person and virtually, have become a common event, and financial aid has been substantial. The unity demonstrated by Christians is a testament to our shared Judeo-Christian values. Christians and Jews believe in the Bible, and they take comfort that Israel's story, its past, present, and future, has been foretold, and that one day there will be peace in Jerusalem. Up next, the ICEJ report from the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem.
We are here in Kibbutz Be'eri. A few months ago, this place here was considered one of the most paradisic, beautiful places in all of Israel. It was a place where young families from all over Israel decided to move here because it was such a peaceful, quiet, beautiful area to live, especially as a young family. Since October 7, everything changed. Since October 7, this place became an empty spot. You see, there is nobody living here in this area. It is a place of devastation. 240,000 people in Israel today are refugees, are evacuees all across Israel. And the Christian Embassy is here on the ground in order to help those evacuees with all the daily need what they are needing. And please have a look what the Christian Embassy is carrying out right now in Israel.
And these very difficult and painful times in Israel right now. We're so glad that God called ICEJ to be especially here also for times like this, to be on the ground and to be your hands and feet, to stand with the people, to reach out to them, to be, however we can in practical ways, a comfort to the people. What we need right now is food, food, and food.
today in the center of Israel, and as you can see here behind me, we are packing food for evacuated families, and this is an ongoing effort that we do with other Israeli companies.
For me, being here today in this storage room or in this packing room means really to stand side by side with the Jewish people, with the nation of Israel, to help and to really be practical, to really be the hands and feet of Jesus, and really to support and to help and to bless.
That ICEJ is here in this time and that we've decided that we're staying, that speaks wonders to the Jewish people.
Dear friends, in this time of crisis, when so many families are being evacuated from the south of Israel, and many of them are leaving with just the clothes on their back, there's a great need for food items and toiletries and clothing and toys for children and many other things. But if we are not able to get those items that are donated to the families, then we haven't accomplished our mission. When we were approached and asked to supply a second truck to make those deliveries, we knew right away that this was something that we could do to help. And I want to say thank you to all of our friends around the world for making it possible to meet this need and many others during this crisis.
We see already many shortages in the stores, and we are here in a huge store room. We want to put much more food here so that we can reach out to people, if it's the elderly, if it's the evacuees that came from the north, from the south, and will also come from the north, and that we can help them to feed them at least. So we want to ask all of you who are standing with Israel at this time, please help us fill our hands so that our feet can go wherever we need to go in order to be your hands and feet. Thank you. We do it all together.
240,000 evacuees, not only here from Kibbutz Be'eri, but from many other communities around the Gaza envelope, and also from the northern region that we're bordering to Lebanon. Those evacuees, they urgently need help. They have been dislocated from their houses, they have been dislocated from their familiar home ground here, from the schools, from the playgrounds of their children, and the Christian Embassy committed to stand with them in these difficult times. We ask you to prayerfully consider to support the work of the Christian Embassy as we are standing with those people who lost overnight their home and their being here in this beautiful neighborhood. God bless you as you do so.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Rebecca Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan El Rome, reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Please join us again next week for all of your Israel updates.